Good morning, everyone. I am here to give you an overview of lesson 9.3. So, in 9.3, it's titled Measures of Center, which technically there are three measures of center. Mean is one of them. We did that last lesson in 9.2. But then there are two others that we're introduced to in this lesson um, called median and mode. Okay? They're all M's, mean, median, mode. Sometimes it's a little confusing to keep them straight. So a measure of center, the definition of that in our notes, describes the typical value in a number set. So any type of average, it's saying that that is generalizing a typical performance. So let's just stick with like quiz scores, okay? So if we were talking about, well, that student's average is, that is generalizing what that student can typically perform. At what level can that student typically perform at, okay? So a measure of center, mean, median, mode, is a way to describe or generalize what a typical performance might be. Okay? Sometimes higher, sometimes lower, but what it typically is. Okay? So we did mean last lesson. It's mean because it makes you do all the work. Mean makes you add them all up and you have to divide. Okay? So mean is the most mathematically taxing of the three. Okay? The other two are median and mode. Median is the first one that's introduced into your notes. It is the numerical value that is in the middle when the numbers are arranged least to greatest. So that right there is the mistake some students make. They forget to arrange the numbers least to greatest. Not all data sets are given to you on a silver platter, least to greatest. Sometimes they are, and that's awesome, but oftentimes they are not. So the first thing you want to do is sort your numbers least to greatest. From there, you want to take off the smallest value, take off the biggest, smallest, biggest, smallest, biggest, smallest, biggest, until you're left with one right in the middle. That number right there is what we call the median, the middle, okay? You can see that in the first page of the notes, there's two examples that I give you. One example has 9 smack in the middle. That's our median. It's the value that's right in the middle. Okay, but in the second data set that I give you, you end up with both 5 and 7 in the middle. If you were to get rid of the biggest, smallest, you whittle it down, you end up with 2 in the middle. When you find yourself in that situation, and you will, what you want to do is actually find the mean of those two numbers. Okay, so technically, mathematically, you are adding the two together and dividing by 2. Okay, now in the example I give you, your two middle numbers are 5 and 7. So what's right in the middle of those? 6. But think about the math behind it. 5 plus 7 is 12. 12 divided by 2 is 6. Okay? So sometimes we're given nice examples where it's like, well, obviously it's 6. It's right in the middle. But sometimes the numbers aren't as obvious. Okay? So technically what you're doing is you're finding the mean of those two numbers. Okay, so when would median be used? Okay, median is often used in examples like income, like what people make, and house values. Okay, if we were to think about situations that, like in Longmeadow, for instance, or I live in East Longmeadow, you can have one or two or a few extremely expensive homes, like over $1 million, okay? And there are some, but that is not a typical house in either of those towns, okay? So what that does, if we were to strictly add them all up, add up all the house values and divide by how many there were, those very few, very expensive homes would be outliers and they would throw off the average, the mean, okay? So oftentimes, median is used in circumstances like this. Same thing with like income, like how much people make. If you have a multimillionaire living in your town, and they do, It's not the best representation for what is typical in a given place. Hope that makes sense. Okay. The next measure of center is mode. This would be the least mathematically taxing. Mode is another measure. It is basically the data value that pops up the most often. Okay, so something that repeats itself. It's not most like it's the highest number. It's something that repeats itself the most. So in the first data set that I gave you, there were two 15s. Okay, nothing else in that data set repeated itself. So in that example, your mode is 15. Okay. In the second data set that I gave you, there was nothing that repeated itself. Okay, so in that instance, our answer is no mode. It is not the number 0. Okay, I say that right in the notes. Okay, 0 is a number. So if you say the mode is 0, what you're saying is that 0 repeats itself the most. Unfortunately, 0 is not even in that data set. Okay. We are going to put the bottom portion of the notes just on hold for another day. But basically what we're going to be looking at, and this is a kind of like a little tricky part once we get more practice, is choosing the best measure for a given situation. Okay, is the mean or the median or the mode the best way to describe a typical value in that data set? And there'll be more on that as we work a little bit more, okay? So we're gonna save that for another day, but hopefully this was a nice overview. We'll have a 2 o'clock meet. Join us if you can, but it will be posted later on in the afternoon. I will see you then.